Please let me know when we're live, Jeremiah.
We're live.
Lovely. Thank you, Jeremiah. Good evening, everyone. We welcome you to this series on Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. We are discussing our topic for our fourth session. It's a class with Mr. Peter Terry as faculty. We really appreciate Peter putting out all the week assignments, reading assignments, which consists of a provisional list of reading passages to be covered each week. And it's listed online. Please comment for details, and we'll send it to you as this may occur. You may be receiving this and watching this on YouTube or Facebook or some other social media platform. Please reach out to us so we can assist you. With that being said, Mr. Peter Terry has been working on 3 previous lessons. We recommend, if you're just joining us now, that you find it online as well. Contact us, please, to learn more. With that said, Mr. Peter Terry has contributed quite a bit to academia. He's taught in many separate types of forums, and furthermore, he's contributed a lot to discussing the Baha'i writings. Now, as we are doing that today, we welcome all of you as we're going along to please respond to these questions that are posed in the session, as Mr. Peter Terry has quite a few of them for you as well. Now, as it relates to raising our hands, please use the Zoom information that's on the platform to raise your hand and you'll be called upon. If Peter Terry wants to make it a little more informal, he'll let you all know. Thank you. Peter, welcome. I think you're muted, Peter.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you,
Right,
thank you. No, I'm not muted. My video is, so I'm just going to make this one appearance. I'm broadcasting to you live from the Sierra Nevada of California at about 3,500 feet, surrounded by gigantic fir trees, and the reception is awful. So what I'm going to do to try to maximize the clarity of the text that I'm going to be sharing with you and the understandability of the audio that is being transmitted, I'm going to eliminate one of the factors, which is video. So I'm going to cut out my video after these first few remarks, and then we'll cut directly to the text and go through the text. And then when we come to an opportunity to ask some questions and have some discussion at the end, then I'll come back on because the fidelity won't be as much of an issue. Okay? Okay, with that, here I go. Bingo. Now, this is, as has already been stated, our session number 4. And just to have you understand the magnitude of the project that we're undertaking here, we have 17 sessions. We have approximately 20 pages in each of those sections, which was the only way that we could go through this entire text in 17 weeks. And what I was discussing with some of the people who came early was that sometime after this course has been completed, which will be on the 10th of December, I'm going to be inviting all of you, because now we have your emails, now that you've registered with Ocean 2.0, is I'm going to invite all of you to come back if you wish, and to invite your friends also to come back and do a slow reading of Gleanings, where we will have much more time to discuss and go into greater depth. So this is the sort of the review. It's not an introduction. I'm sure that you've noticed that by now. We're going to go pretty deep, but we can still go a lot deeper when we have more time. So I repeated the same introduction, mostly for people who had not read the introduction before, which contains some principles that Baha'is have been given by Baha'u'llah and also by the Guardian for how to approach a text, how to get the most out of reading a text so that we actually end up understanding it. Because Baha'u'llah is quite insistent on this, which I didn't understand that when I first encountered the faith and I was 19. I thought we were just supposed to feel inebriated all the time from the word of God. But he actually wants us to understand what he's saying. In this very brief paragraph here, I give some brief description of what is contained in these selections here, the principal themes and the 8 excerpts from the writings of Baha'u'llah that are collected here are the nature of God, which is in 27, the meaning of divine unity, which is in 28, the purpose of God in creating man, which is in 29, the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Bab in Baha'u'llah, 30, the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael, 32. I don't know why I missed 31, but don't worry about it. We'll get to it later on. The revelation and will of God, 33. The purpose of sending manifestations to humanity, 34. And all of these are what you would call theological topics. And one of the discoveries that I made as I was studying these topics is that how often Baha'u'llah says this is something that's been taught by all of the manifestations of God, and it's in all the books of God. And so this is a real education, not just in the Baha'i faith, but in the faith of God that has been revealed to us since time immemorial and will continue to be revealed to us forever. And so I wanted to read this very brief quotation that I'm sure most of you know very well. It's from the exordium, the first words that are preceding the Arabic hidden words. This is that which hath descended from the realm of glory, uttered by the tongue of power and might, and revealed unto the prophets of old. We have taken the inner essence thereof and clothed it in the garment of brevity, as a token of grace unto the righteous, that they may stand faithful unto the covenant of God, may fulfill in their lives his trust, and in the realm of spirit obtain the gem of divine virtue. That is a summary of what, this is a summary, of course, of what is happening with hidden words, both in the Arabic and in the Persian, but it's also the message that we get when we study these passages and gleanings. Most of them are eternal truths of the manifestations that the Guardian believed it was very important for us to come into contact with, study, and understand. In fact, when he first sent us Gleanings, he said that it was required for anybody who was teaching the faith to read Gleanings first. Now that it's available, read it first, because your teaching is going to be really transformed by doing so. So what I've done in this particular copy is to bold the text in red when it's Baha'u'llah speaking. And then when I put my comments, I put them in black, okay, black against white. So I'm not going to read each of the passages. And the reason why I'm not going to read those passages is because it would take too long. And because I would be tending to hurry in order to get through the whole material. And I don't want to hurry. I want to focus on the text itself. So what I would recommend to those of you who are watching today is you might consider opening up to chapter 27. Just open up to chapter 27 and follow along. Because if you look at the actual text and you listen to what I'm saying at the same time, that might be a good way to experience the two of them together. So this first text, as I said, is really about God. It's about a definition of what God is and what God is not. And then, of course, immediately after talking about what is God, Baha'u'llah, or rather Shoghi Effendi, chose quotes that would talk about the manifestation of God, because he wants to make it very clear to the Baha'is. There's no way to understand God without understanding the manifestation of God, because the manifestation of God has been created to do this one thing, to enlighten us about the nature of the divine and of the worlds that we're going to inhabit, because our nature is basically a spiritual nature. We are spirit living on earth for a short time. So one of the quotations is very important because it has to do with our relationship to God, which means our relationship with the manifestations. And that is, having created the world and all that liveth and moveth therein, he, through the direct operation of his unconstrained and sovereign will, chose to confer upon man the unique distinction and capacity to know him and to love him, a capacity that must needs be regarded as the generating impulse and the primary purpose underlying the whole of creation. That in itself you could spend a lifetime meditating on. Just the sheer responsibility that we have, because our capacity to know and love God is that important. It's the purpose of creation. The worlds that we are going to encounter throughout eternity, we're all created for this purpose. It's and if we come to understand how important it is, it's really going to help us to detach ourselves from this world and not take it so very seriously, and to understand that what comes next is really, really important. And here, my comment on this was, what distinguished Adam and Eve from all the other creatures that were depicted in the first chapters of Genesis? It was that they had this unique distinction and capacity to know God and to love him. And likewise, upon Adam and Eve were focused the radiance of all of his names and attributes, and the reality of man is a mirror of his own self. What all of these words of Baha'u'llah are evoking in us is an understanding of what Genesis meant when it said God created man in his image and likeness. That's what it is. That's what it is. The image and likeness of God is this capacity to know and to love him, and to reflect all of his names and attributes. Then next, it's talking about these energies with which the day star of divine bounty and the source of heavenly guidance hath endowed the reality of man lie, however, latent within him. Even as the flame is hidden within the candle and the rays of light are potentially present in the lamp. Very important point that Baha'u'llah explores in great depth in many of his tablets. All of our gifts from God are latent, they're potential. We have to take action to develop them. They do not develop by themselves. Sometimes other people can help us with this, but most of the work is our work. And it's work that is to our everlasting benefit, because it prepares us for eternity. Then the next quotation is now we're talking about what is the nature of the manifestation of God. And since there is no tie of direct intercourse to bind the one true God with his creation, and no resemblance whatever can exist between the transient and the eternal, the contingent and the absolute, he hath ordained that in every age and dispensation a pure and stainless soul be made manifest in the kingdoms of earth and heaven. And I'm very grateful to somebody who pointed out to me something that I hadn't commented on, which was that this soul, the manifestation, is manifest in the kingdoms of earth and heaven, not just in the earth. We tend to think of that. We tend to think, well, Baha'u'llah came to this earth and he walked upon this earth and he spoke in our language, and his writings are a book, and it's all very physical and it's all very familiar and it's all very comfortable. But no, he's also manifest in the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is where we're going. And I don't say that lightly. I say that because heaven, in the word heaven is associated with the kingdom. In the Gospels, for example, Jesus in one Gospel will say the kingdom of heaven, and in another Gospel he says the kingdom. He just calls it the kingdom. Now, why is that important? Because this is echoed throughout the Quran, in all kinds of Islamic literature, and in the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha. They talk about it all the time. We're going to heaven. We're going to the kingdom of God. That's because Baha'u'llah's influence, as powerful as it is in this world, is even more powerful in the next realm, and that's where we're going. And then this talks about the twofold nature of the manifestation, and I wrote a little note about this, pointing out that sometimes Baha'u'llah talks about the manifestation having a threefold nature and sometimes a twofold nature. But really the purpose in making those different statements is to basically make it sure that people understood that the manifestation has part of his nature that's not human. It's divine. And that is the part that is the most important to us, because that is the part that has the authority to give us the laws that will make our lives run the way they're supposed to. And there's much to be said about that, but we will go on to this. We'll talk about this, and then when he talks about this manifestation, it goes into a great detail about what does this manifestation mean? And like, it is for this very purpose. Let's back up here. It says, through the teachings of this day star of truth, that's the manifestation, every man will advance and develop until he attaineth a station at which he can manifest all the potential forces with which his inmost true self hath been endowed. The whole game is about this evolution, about this development of our potentials that are already inside of us. And it's for this very purpose that in every age and dispensation, the prophets of God and his chosen ones have appeared amongst men and have evinced such power as is born of God and such might as only the eternal can reveal. I'm sure you are familiar with some of the statements of Abdul Baha, where he talks about the limitations of human ways of understanding. He talks about the senses, he talks about reason, he talks about tradition, he talks about intuition. And he says, but there's a power that human beings can be blessed with, and that is the power of the Holy Spirit. And the power of the Holy Spirit, that's the one that brings about our spiritual development so that we are ready for the next world and for all of the amazing experiences we're going to have in the future. And here he makes a wonderful and brilliant and even a slightly acerbic statement about those people who deny that revelation is progressive. He says, how can one of sane mind ever seriously imagine that in view of certain words, the meaning of which he cannot comprehend, the portal of God's infinite guidance can ever be closed in the face of men? Can he ever conceive for these divine luminaries, these resplendent lights, either a beginning or an end? You know, don't tell me that Baha'u'llah can't reason. Don't tell me that he doesn't have a sense of humor. he drives home the point with such beauty and such skill to get under our skin when we seem to think that we've figured it out. And oh, yeah, I know who the manifestations are. I can count them on the fingers of one hand. Maybe not. You know, and then to bring it back to the fact that this is an eternal message. This is an eternal pattern. He says, such has been God's method, continued from everlasting to everlasting. So in the next one, which is 2028, he begins with praising the service to the cause and glorification of his beauteous name. And whenever Baha'u'llah talks about service to the cause, he's always talking about teaching. And we're going to encounter a passage in the Gleanings where he spells it right out straightforward. He says, the only way you can help me is by teaching the cause. And when you think about it, it's absolutely true, because we are the mouthpieces of the faith. If we don't speak about the faith to people, how are they supposed to find out about them? You know, there's only so far that the book that's in the library on the shelf is not actually being read. It needs to have a human being open it, and then it's being read. And so he talks about this in many, many of the tablets. I think prior to this particular one, there were like about 5 or 6 where he was referring to teaching the cause. And I've noted those whenever I've run into them. And I was quite surprised, to be honest with you. You know, I thought I'd identified all of those passages years ago, and I was wrong. There were more, a lot more. And then here he's talking about how the sayings and doings of the followers of Shi'i Islam have dulled the joy and fervor of its early days and tarnished the pristine brilliancy of its light. You may wonder what that's all about. I've written a note about it, and I don't know if you can't see the note on this page, because what I'm doing is I'm sharing with you my document. But maybe by next time, we can actually use the text as it is in the app and go through that. Although that might be rather on the overwhelming side. But when you actually read the text and you look through it yourself, what you will find is there are a lot of notes. And the notes are designated by portions of the text that are underlined in blue. All you have to do is click on that, and on the right-hand side, a note will appear with a text. And those are my comments, which are in some cases summarized here, and sometimes I went further in those comments. So if you haven't already discovered this, I recommend that you do so. And if you have problems accessing the notes, if you click on things and they don't appear, please let me know, because we're testing out a mode of communication here, and we don't know what works and what doesn't work unless you tell us. Okay, but here I just want to make a comment here, because we're here on looking at Shi'i Islam. Baha'u'llah is very emphatic in many of his writings that at the very beginnings of Shi'i Islam, meaning when Muhammad appointed his nephew and the first believer in his cause, male believer, whose name was Ali, he appointed him the first imam, was to be the spiritual leader of the Muslims after his death. And then it was intended that the descendants of Ali would be the spiritual leaders of Islam, perhaps in perpetuity, certainly for a very long time to come. Unfortunately, what happened was, because of various circumstances, and mostly division between the Muslims at the time, that the brilliancy of the extraordinary spiritual gifts of Ali and of his sons, Hussein and Hassan, and then of some of the generations afterwards, were dimmed, were damaged, and especially, and not so much the imams, but it was mostly the people who were supposedly believing in the imams. And eventually, they came to sort of hijack the faith of Islam from Muhammad and from the Quran and introduce all kinds of beliefs that were never in the original text. And this is something that Baha'u'llah refers to many, many times. And then, of course, what this led to was that instead of being spiritually prepared to recognize the Bab, they were not. And hence, what he talks about is he says, behold how their evil doings have hindered them from recognizing in the day of resurrection the word of truth, exalted be his glory. Speaking, who's the word of truth? The word of truth in this case is the Bab. And for the Babis and for the followers of all religions, it was also the word of truth was Baha'u'llah. So I wanted to point out that this is a tablet that was written to a very eminent Baha'i in the time of Baha'u'llah, whose name was Sayyid Mehdi Dahaji. And this note is quite long, and you can read it and see, and you can also understand from reading it what Baha'u'llah said about the difference between the station of the manifestation and the station of even his most eminent followers, meaning the imams. This has a direct impact upon our understanding also of the most great infallibility of Baha'u'llah and the infallibility of Abdul Baha, of the guardian and of the universal house of justice. They're on a completely different level, because these other forms of infallibility are derived from the infallibility of the manifestation, which is absolute. It is the closest we come to knowing God. So there are many detailed descriptions of this in Baha'u'llah's writings, especially in this tablet called the Ishraqat, which came after the Kitab-i Aqdas. And I highly recommend that you read that. It is in a collection. It's in a couple of different collections. One of them is called Tablets Revealed After the Kitab-i Aqdas. And so here then the next paragraph, he's talking about, again, about the manifestation. What is the manifestation? Explaining what he is, his purpose and his identity. And one of the reasons why the manifestation has to be unique is because he is the symbol of the unity of God when he is alive and throughout his dispensation. So there can only be one manifestation who is actually in charge, so to speak, at any one time. The miracle with the Bab and Baha'u'llah is there were two manifestations alive on earth at the same time. But you notice that even there were two of them at the same time, Baha'u'llah followed the Bab. He was a Babi as far as everybody was concerned until it came his time to declare his prophethood. And then he became the center of focus. And this was predicted by the Bab. He said, the promised one will come. And when he comes, you have to follow him. There's no choice. If you don't follow him, you are not a believer in my eyes. You have violated your covenant with me. In 29. Again, the reiteration of this teaching that the purpose of God in creating man hath been and will ever be to enable him to know his creator and to attain his presence. So, Baha'u'llah tackles this one straight on in this tablet. What is the presence of God? It's not some sort of new agey idea, you know. We've got a lot of ideas that have been around for many, many millennia that God is everything or God is in everyone. No, Baha'u'llah is so insistent. The presence of God is the manifestation. That's how we know God is through the manifestation. It is focused entirely in his person and his book, his revelation. And for those who are interested in understanding the specific language here about the distance of two bows and the Sadratul Muntaha, these are two quotations. As you see, they're very close to each other in the Quran. In chapter 53, 9, and verse 9 and verse 14. And these two verses are explained again in the notes, but to tell you briefly, what they mean is they're verses that are referring to the boundary that exists between human knowledge and the knowledge of God. And the boundary is the manifestation. Our knowledge of God stops where the manifestation is. It's in him, and we cannot go beyond him. And that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy and appreciate the names and attributes of God in all things. There is a universal revelation. And Baha'u'llah explains this in the Kitab-i-Gan very beautifully and very convincingly. In fact, you have to remember that most people in the world are actually aware to some degree of the universal manifestation or the universal revelation of God, because they do see, a lot of people see these signs and attributes of God in things. And sometimes they think it's because everything is God. And you can understand why they would come to that conclusion. But Baha'u'llah says, of course, that's not God. But those are the signs of God. Those are the attributes of God. And they're reflected. They're like sparkles in all things. And when you discover them, of course, you're going to be excited because you're getting to know God. But the level at which you get to know God through all things is completely different than the knowledge of God you acquire for the most recent manifestation of God. That's what progressive revelation is all about, is that we have this capacity to see way beyond what the world shows us, which is not to stop appreciating the world, but it's to see that there's this greater consciousness, and the greater consciousness is absolutely indispensable for our future. Because in the next world, we're not going to have the creation to look at and ooh and ah about how beautiful the sunset is, because we don't know what's going on there, but it's certainly not going to be like this world. By the way, I'm going to give you a little preview. The next to last passage in the Gleanings is the only passage that I know of where Baha'u'llah actually talks about what happens when we go to the next world. And he does so in very strong, clear language. I can understand why the Guardian maybe left that one to the next to last, because the last statement is probably the most challenging statement that Baha'u'llah makes. But we're not going to get ahead of us. We won't. I'm just telling you that in case you like to look ahead, because I'm naughty that way. I like to start books at the end sometimes. So here are my notes, which are in quite some detail. And the reason why is because I wanted to talk about what is this, the purpose of God in creating in man, and how do we know about this from the other scriptures, because Baha'u'llah says that every scripture has taught this. So he says, look, to this most excellent aim, this supreme objective, all the heavenly books and the divinely revealed and weighty scriptures unequivocally bear witness. You can't get clearer than that. So I said, okay, if it's in every scripture, I need to show people some places where it's found. And for those who are familiar with both the Torah, with the Jewish scriptures, and with the Gospels, here's the first one right here. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, with all thy might. There you go. And Jesus repeats the very same words and says, this is the greatest commandment. And what is that? That's knowing and loving God. We're commanded to do it. That's what we're supposed to do. And there are also quotes in the Quran, which I cited, but I didn't want to turn each one of these commentaries into a book, so I didn't write the whole book and look for Buddhism and Taoism and all the different religions, but they're there. That's the point. If Baha'u'llah says they're there, he's not joking. We just have to go look for them. And by the way, finding these gems, I have to tell you, in my many years of searching for the meaning of these teachings, and most of the time, especially when I was younger, is not really understanding much of anything, because I had to immerse myself over and over and over, is that every time I've gone looking in another scripture, I've found those statements. And those statements that were not recognized by the people who believed in those scriptures. They didn't know they existed, and they didn't know what they meant. And hence the absolute joy of finding as a Baha'i, Baha'u'llah said it was going to be there, and it's there, and I know where it is, and I read it for myself. It's really a thrilling experience. So I'm going to go on to the next one. This is a tough one for a lot of us. He was the dayspring of truth, is no doubt fully capable of rescuing from such remoteness wayward souls and causing them to draw nigh unto his court and attain unto his presence. And then he comes in with a punchline. If God had pleased, he had surely made all men one people. Wow. But wait a second, aren't Baha'is, don't we believe in the unity of mankind? Yes, we do believe in the unity of mankind. But what does the unity of mankind really mean? What does it mean? What is the challenge that Baha'u'llah gives us? He gives us a challenge to transform the world with his teachings so that we become unified. Because we're just not all that unified when you just leave us all by ourselves. There's work involved. God did not create us all happy and, friendly with each other. He created us capable of becoming that way. But that's our work. That's our potential. And it's a very hard work. But he wants us to also understand, by quoting this verse from the Quran, that God has always intended that we do the work. He never intended to make everything perfect already, And in fact, for those people who thought that paradise was perfect, wait a second. If it was perfect, then where did the snake come from? No, it wasn't perfect. It was a wonderful environment, but it was an environment that held a challenge. And the challenge to humanity is always to make the right decisions, and especially to make the right decisions when it comes to God. Now I'm going to go to, I quoted, let's see. Here's another thing that he's talking about. It's a very interesting point that he makes in this tablet and also in in the Kitabi Agan. The manifestations of divine justice, the day springs of heavenly grace, have, when they appeared amongst men, always been destitute of all earthly dominion and shorn of the means of worldly ascendancy, should be attributed to this same principle of separation and distinction which animateth the divine purpose. Wow, what am I talking about here? All right, the principle of separation and distinction is this, the matter that it's up to us to choose to do what is right. It is up to us. It's our decision. And he gives us every opportunity to make that decision and to forgive us when we make the wrong decision and to encourage us to make the right decision. But there's still that principle of separation and distinction that means that it's up to us to do that. And that when we make the wrong decision, we separate ourselves not only from each other, but from God. And one of the things that he's bringing out in this passage about this separation and distinction is that human beings are very impressed with people who are powerful and rich. We've always been this way. And so what does he say? The manifestations have appeared amongst men always destitute of all earthly dominion and shorn of the means of worldly ascendancy. That means they've got no power. They've got no money. And it's not just Jesus. Muhammad was like that. Buddha was like that. Baha'u'llah inherited a vast fortune from his father, and it was all taken away from him. And whatever wasn't taken away from him when he was younger, he gave to the poor. Now, see, this gives you an idea of what the manifestations are really about. They're not about this world at all. They're not about power. They're not about wealth. They're not about accomplishment. They're about submission to the will of God, about creating a culture in which the divine love is reflected in all actions. And here I cite lots of quotations about this principle of separation and distinction because it's really fundamental to Baha'i teachings. And one of the ways in which we encounter it is when Baha'u'llah talks about the principle of that world order is raised upon two pillars, and those pillars are reward and punishment. That's what justice is about. Reward and punishment. You do the right thing, you get rewarded. You do the wrong thing, you get punished. The punishment is what motivates you to realize that what you did is wrong and to motivate you also to correct that, to repent and turn towards doing the right thing, which will give you automatically a reward. This is the structure of the universe according to Baha'u'llah and in many of his passages, and it has everything to do with choosing the right thing rather than the wrong thing. And by the way, if you go back and you read, for example, the last chapters of the book of Deuteronomy about the choice that Moses said is before the Israelites, he says you can pick one of two paths. Either you obey the laws from God, in which case you will possess the land and everything will go well for you, or you're going to disobey them and then you will be dispossessed of the land and everything will go bad for you. And this is fundamental to Judaism, fundamental to the Old Testament, but it's also fundamental to Christianity and to Islam. And this is such an important thing for us to grasp, because we cannot create a world civilization that is based upon anything other than justice. There has to be this principle of reward for the good and punishment of the evil, because if it doesn't exist, you cannot get people to do the right thing all the time. They will not of themselves because they're nice. Not everybody is nice, okay? And even the nice people are nice, not nice all the time. And again, here Baha'u'llah makes the statement, this principle hath operated in each of the previous dispensations and been abundantly demonstrated. Oh, and then this heartbreaking statement here where he says, behold how in this dispensation, he's speaking about the time in which he was living, you know, the 1870s, 80s, and maybe even earlier than that. In this dispensation, the worthless and foolish have fondly imagined that by such instruments as massacre, plunder, and banishment, who was massacred? The Babis. Who were plundered? The Babis. Who were banished? Baha'u'llah and the Babis, okay? They can extinguish the lamp which the hand of divine power hath lit, or eclipse the day star of everlasting splendor. How utterly unaware they seem to be of the truth that such adversity is the oil that feedeth the flame of this lamp. This is God's transforming power. He changeth whatsoever he willeth. He verily hath power over all things. Wow, guys. I mean, to me, when I read those words, they give me such hope and such confidence that the mess we see in the world is going to turn around because God is in charge. We're not in charge. It's going to happen. And we can play a big role in it happening. And here he's reiterating this same thing. Consider at all times the sovereignty exercised by the ideal king. And behold the evidences of his power and paramount influence. And here he's speaking of the manifestation of God. But he could also be speaking of God too. That's the thing. In this case, you know, Baha'u'llah over and over again says, whatever is talking about God is talking about the manifestation. And whatever is talking about manifestation is talking about God. And the reason why they're equivalent to each other is because this is the closest we ever come to God. Well, he's talking to human beings. We're not going to go and learn the essence of God. We're never going to encounter it. We encounter God through the manifestation. And that needs to be enough for us. And if we don't feel that it's enough for us, maybe we don't know who the manifestation is. That's the reality, is that we haven't encountered what his reality is. That because his reality is not a man who's inspired. There are tons of people who are inspired and wonderfully inspired. Poets, musicians, scientists, we could go on and on and on. But they aren't the manifestation of God. And you think about this, as extraordinarily gifted as we rightfully regard Abdu'l-Baha to be, Abdu'l-Baha insisted that we call him Abdul-Baha, which means in Arabic, the slave of God. Now think about that. We like to say the servant of God, which is, it's less, has less negative connotations. But actually in Arabic, it means that he is the complete servant. He does everything for God and he gets nothing in recompense. He asks for nothing in recompense. And that's because Baha'u'llah is so exalted for his firstborn son. Think about what a miracle this is. Firstborn sons, I'm a firstborn son, by the way. And firstborn sons tend to think that we're pretty hot stuff, And, they tend to think that they're just about as good as their dad, maybe better, But not this one. His brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, had that problem. He thought that he was as good as his dad. And when he was in his youth, he claimed to reveal verses of God until his father told him, cut that out, stop that nonsense. And by the way, there will be no manifestation of God for at least 1,000 years. But that didn't stop Mirza Muhammad Ali because, of course, as you probably know this story, as soon as the will and testament of Baha'u'llah, the Kitabiyat, was read to the Baha'is by Abdu'l-Baha, and declaring that Abdu'l-Baha was to lead the community and that everybody must follow him and show him complete obedience because he was acting in the name of Baha'u'llah with the same authority as Baha'u'llah. As soon as that happened, Mirza Muhammad Ali broke with his brother, stole some documents that were meant to be that Baha'u'llah had left for Abdu'l-Baha. And then from there on out was his implacable enemy, seeking at every time to undermine his authority and to win converts to himself, which, if you know Baha'i history, you know was an abject failure, and that every attempt of his his family and his children, grandchildren, and so forth to win that support from the Baha'i community has failed. They will never regain the station they had to be second only to Abdu'l-Baha. And all because they lusted after being the appointee of Baha'u'llah. They wanted the top crown. They wanted the crown and they didn't get it. So they turned against. And sometimes it's very difficult for Baha'is to understand this. And sometimes, and I have very great empathy for anybody who goes through this struggle. Why is it that the manifestation has such a rotten family? And maybe you can remember this, those of you who've read the Gospels and who come from a Christian background, that Jesus was once encountered when he was in a meeting with his followers, and someone come and says, your family's standing outside, your mother and your brothers and your sisters. And he said to them, my mother and my brothers and my sisters are here. They are those who believe in God and follow his commands. So what does that tell us? You know, you could tell us and say, well, he sounds really pretty severe. You know, that's pretty tough. But you haven't considered maybe the other way, which is, how about those people who are related to the manifestation of God and don't recognize him and don't see who he is? Jesus was not just one of the sons of Mary. He's the Son of God. You know, he was destined to have this enormous impact on human civilization, which we can see all around us. And Baha'u'llah, the same thing. He had many members of his family turn against him. They missed out big time. You know, we shouldn't have, we should not have, tears tears of mercy, shall we say, for people who squandered such an extraordinary gift, a gift from God that you should be related to the manifestation. But obviously, there are people who just can't stand the pressure, can't stand the competition. You're making one member of the family more important than all the others. And the fact of the matter is that one member of that family was more important than all the others combined. So here we have more very beautiful passage talking about the nature of the manifestation. As you can see, many of these passages are defining what a manifestation is. And I wanted to point out something very beautiful, and which we don't see very often in the translated Baha'i writings. And that is a reference to the future. And here he's talking about the manifestations. He says, every one of them is a mirror of God, reflecting naught else but his self, his beauty, his might and glory, if you will understand. All else besides them are to be regarded as mirrors capable of reflecting the glory of these manifestations, who are themselves the primary mirrors of the divine being. If ye be not devoid of understanding, no one hath ever escaped them, neither are they to be hindered from achieving their purpose. These mirrors will everlastingly succeed each other and will continue to reflect the light of the Ancient of Days. Wow. Right? Baha'u'llah is predicting that the sequence of divine manifestations will never end. Humanity is always going to be able to count a manifestation coming at the time he's needed most to give a fresh spiritual lesson that is for their time, for that time, and that also reinforces the essential teachings of religion, which never change. And I love this ending. Look at this ending. It's so beautiful. They that reflect their glory will, speaking of us, the believers, in like manner, continue to exist forevermore, for the grace of God can never cease from flowing. This is a truth that none can disprove. Now, if you have your doubts sometimes about where you're going to go after this life, read this passage. That should reinforce your faith that all is well. And this is a promise from the manifestation. Here we have Baha'u'llah actually using the language of successive revelations and a progressive revelation, and speaking about his own revelation. And this is also, it brings forth a teaching of his that is very important for us to understand. A lot of people don't understand why Baha'u'llah, since he's the most important manifestation in the sense that humanity has ever encountered, because he's encountering us at the time of the coming age of humanity. We're starting a new cycle of growth. It's going to last for at least 500,000 years. He is inaugurating that. His revelation is going to be overshadowing that whole 500,000 years. That's how impressive this manifestation is. So, and he wrote here, he chose to hide his own self behind 1,000 veils, lest profane and mortal eyes discover his glory. This is something that a lot of us have gone through struggles with, because we don't understand, why didn't Baha'u'llah just blow us away? Seriously, why didn't he perform miracles like no other manifestation? Because he isn't like any other manifestation. He's the greatest manifestation to come down the pike. So why didn't we get, such an overwhelming revelation from him that we couldn't but embrace him and follow his teachings? And all right, you know the answer. The answer is that denies the principle of separation. That denies us of free will. That denies us of exercising our human nature, which is to choose good, freely choose good. When fully aware that we can choose evil and that we won't even necessarily be punished immediately. We know that because we've explored that journey so often. But this is really the wisdom behind it. And he explains this many times. And in fact, if you want a confirmation of this, there's a wonderful autobiography of Mirza Haydar Ali, who was called the Angel of Carmel. And he was an early believer who was an absolutely fearless teacher of the faith. He went to various places in North Africa. He went all over the Middle East, teaching the faith. He was really intrepid. He was fearless, and he was very successful. He actually, attracted many people to the cause. And when he grew older, Baha'u'llah says, I want you to come here. I want you to come live beside me. I want you to be here. So he did. He went to Carmel and he lived there and he wrote his autobiography. And one day he went to Baha'u'llah and he says, will you show me your glory? And Baha'u'llah said, yes, I will. And so he permitted him to come into his presence when he was revealing verses. And Mirza Haydar Ali describes that experience. And his description of that experience in itself will indicate to you why it is that he doesn't show his full nature, his glory to everybody. It's overwhelming. It was overwhelming for this man who had dedicated his life to the faith, who was that spiritually aware, who was that mature in the life of the Spirit. And yet he was absolutely, he couldn't speak. He could not describe the thing. He said, it's beyond my capacity. The only thing that I've ever encountered this, in our Judeo-Christian experience, is the story of when Moses goes to Mount Sinai and the people can't come. They can't follow him because the spiritual experience that Moses has on the top of Mount Carmel when he's in communion with God is beyond their capacity. They do not have, they can't live through it. And the same, there are many references by the way, in the books of the Torah and the Pentateuch. Well, so there's not just one description of this, but there are many descriptions that refer to this. And another one is the case when there were 3 disciples of Jesus who went up on a mountain to be with Jesus while he was praying. And in that experience, God speaks to Jesus, and they report that this happens. And they say that he was transformed. He was transfigured. He became a being of light. Very much the same sort of experience. Overwhelming and not something you can tell everybody. In fact, you don't want to tell it. And Baha'u'llah even talks about it. Lest profane and mortal eyes discover his glory. Can you imagine how perverted human beings are and how they would take that revelation of God and mock it and debase it and poke holes in it and say, oh, that's not really God. That's not really revelation. You see what they do already to the book, to the revealed word of the manifestation. So imagine if he was to show his true nature to humanity. We're not mature enough for that. And maybe we will eventually be mature enough for that, but certainly not at this juncture in our lives. And here he talks about when the set time of concealment was fulfilled, we sent forth, while still wrapped within a myriad veils, an infinitesimal glimmer of the effulgent glory enveloping the face of the youth. And lo, the entire company of the dwellers of the realms above were seized with violent commotion, and the favorite of God fell down in adoration before him. This is the effect on the people in the other world, in heaven, in the spiritual worlds. This is how moved they were by that experience, by showing an infinitesimal glimmer of the effulgent glory. We're dealing with something much bigger than we think. And we need to remind ourselves of that every day. Here, this is a passage 22, where Baha'u'llah is speaking about Abraham and the sacrifice. And the sacrifice that Abraham made. Now, this is very interesting because what is this sacrifice? Did Abraham actually sacrifice Ishmael or Isaac or no? Nobody was sacrificed. He offered his sacrifice. Okay. And how about Jesus? When Jesus sacrificed his life for humanity, what was actually sacrificed? Did it kill Jesus? No, it didn't. It just killed his body. His body was going to die anyway. We have to get these things clear in our minds and understand this is sacrifice. It is a willingness to give everything to God, everything. And because you're willing to give everything, he's not going to ask you for everything. And how do we know that? We know that because all of those 20,000 martyrs to the Baha'i cause, all of them are in heaven, are in joyful communion with the Bab and Baha'u'llah. They're never going to die. They could not be killed by their murderers. And so we have nothing to fear ourselves about this whole mystery of sacrifice. Sacrifice is about giving yourself up for God. It's not extermination of your being. There's nothing about that is, God is not trying to destroy anybody. He's trying to lift us up to our true nature, to our greatest nature. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you, and I put it in the note, is the last Arabic hidden word, number 71, which talks about this crimson ink that is shed in thy path, which is sacrifice. It's the sacrifice of your life, but it's not necessarily in death. It can be in life, in living. He says, write all that we have revealed unto thee with the ink of light upon the tablet of thy spirit. Should this not be in thy power, then make thine ink of the essence of thy heart. If this thou canst not do, then write with that crimson ink that hath been shed in my path. And now comes the extraordinary statement. Sweeter indeed is this to me than all else, that its light may endure forever. I'm going to skip to the end because I have this intuition that probably we're coming to the end of our time or close to it. But you can read more of this whole text and my notes. Those are all in the app, in the Ocean 2.0 app. And I hope that all of you have been able to get into that and that you have been able to see the notes. And if you haven't read them, you can read them anytime. It's, there's no requirement that they be read before the class, before my presentation. It's fine to do it afterwards. I think that this is let me see, is this the last one? No, the last one is, let me see. I want to go to the last one. There we go. Here we go. Here we go. Ha ha ha. This is a wonderful statement. It's an important statement for us. Ever since we were little kids, we were profoundly influenced by what our parents and our grandparents and, the generations of older people around us. And let's face it, we're surrounded by older people for a long time. We start first when we were born, and then we go to school, and our teachers are always much older than us, and that will continue to be the case all the way through college. Even graduate school, most of the professors are like, our parents' age or grandparents' age. And then for many of us, we go get jobs and we have older people telling us what to do there too. This is we have a lot of experience of doing what other people tell us to do. So consider these words in that context. We've been very well trained to do what we're told to do and to have confidence that the older person knows better than we know. As to thy question regarding the sayings of the leaders of past religions, Every wise and praiseworthy man will no doubt eschew. Now, that's a wonderful English word. It means completely avoid, have nothing to do with such vain and profitless talk. Well, now, beloved friends, uh, there's something really naughty in me that takes a delight in reading this because it's overturning the world. It's saying, don't pay any attention to what these people think they know best. Don't even bother, right? And then he follows this up with saying, the incomparable creator hath created all men from one same substance. Wow, let's look at that. One same substance. That means that these leaders of past religions are in no way superior to us. Doesn't matter if they're, decades older. Doesn't matter if they're generations older. It doesn't matter if they wrote extraordinary books that have been around for thousands of years. No, it doesn't matter. We've been all created from the same substance and have exalted their reality above the rest of his creatures. Above what? All those other creatures that God has made, which, by the way, he never really defines because it's not just the creatures in this world. Remember when he talks about every planet, every star hath its planets and there are creatures living there. He's talking about an entire universe, physical universe full of creatures. And the reality of man is exalted above all of these creatures. And then he comes to the most important words, I think, in this whole passage. Success or failure, gain or loss, must therefore depend upon man's own exertions. The more he striveth, the greater will be his progress. And then in his loving compassion, he says, we fain would hope that the vernal waters of the bounty of God may cause the flowers of true understanding to spring from the soil of men's hearts and may wash them from all earthly defilements. Now, if that sounds like flowery language, that's okay, because it is. It's very flowery, but it's full of love. It's full of compassion, having just told us that success or failure, gain or loss must therefore depend upon man's own exertions. He expresses his hope that the bounty of God will bring us to this spiritual life and wash us from our excessive attachment to this world, which is going to go away so quickly. Soon we'll be flying in the other worlds of God. Now, I welcome your comments, your questions, and I turn it over to Jeremiah.
Good evening, friends. So, do we have anyone in the Zoom who has a specific question or comment that they'd like to make? If not, I would look and see what we have online. I do not see anything specifically online, Peter. There's one question, and that is,
I want to, what? Go ahead.
so this one question is, does everyone recognize the latest manifestation in heaven? So like after people pass away from this life, even if they didn't recognize the manifestation in this life, do they recognize them then?
Well, I don't know. First of all, honestly, I don't know. I don't think that Baha'u'llah talked about that. And I think there's great wisdom in him not talking about that, because if people could get away with not having to do the work that's involved in recognizing a manifestation and then following him, then of course they're going to not do the work. They're going to choose the easy way. That's what human beings do. So if you want to motivate them to make that choice, the right choice, you can't tell them, oh, everything's going to be forgiven when you go to the next world, because they won't bother. And I mean, I don't know how many of you raised children, but you know that from raising children. Children are very much like that. If you give if there's no, that again, it speaks to this: justice is the ground of life and of the world. And if you don't have justice, then people don't choose the right way, because anything goes, you know? Bad is just as good. Well, one person's bad as another person's good, That kind of relativistic nonsense, which doesn't get us any closer to God, and it doesn't get us any closer to doing God's will. Somebody asked another question, and it appeared and then it disappeared.
That question is:
What was it?
Are the veils a reason of the Bab asking Baha'u'llah to wait 19 years to announce? This is a question in regards to the 9 or 19 years. Why did the Bab ask Baha'u'llah to wait?
My understanding is Bob told, the Bob said that him whom God shall make manifest is going to come in either 9 years or 19 years, which he did in some tablet, but not in the Persian Bayan. And it's the Persian Bayan that was actually quoted in one of the passages here. But those predictions were for a reason that's very clear in retrospect. Okay? In retrospect, we can see that there was great wisdom in not having an immediate transition. Because if there had been an immediate transition, the unfaithfulness of Mirza Yahya and of all those people who followed him, and in fact, all the bad Babis, would not have had a chance to manifest themselves. And if they hadn't had a chance to manifest themselves, then what a thorn in the side of Baha'u'llah they would have been during his dispensation. But because they saw this was their opportunity, their opportunity, wow, we're going to take charge now, And remember that according to Nabil's narrative, 25 people declared to be him whom God shall make manifest. And this is in addition to all the people who claim to be mirrors and this is and that's is. They gave themselves all kinds of exalted names because they wanted to be, they wanted to be clothed with the glory of the Bab, even though they weren't. Okay? I mean, we have only to look at all of the television evangelists in the United States to know how that works. The people who arise to leadership in religion are not necessarily the people who are spiritually gifted and who are the humble servants of God that we should have leading us. They are people who have ambitions. They're looking to make money. They're looking to have power. They're looking to do something in this world, and this is the way Mirza Yahya and his followers were. And if they hadn't been given that opportunity, they would have still been there. They would have still been able to exert their negative influence. But I mean, think of it. When you think of it that way, you see, well, this was a very wise pause that was necessary. But there are other reasons. There are many other reasons. It was during this interval between the two dispensations, that of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, that Baha'u'llah revealed the hidden words. And the hidden words is a text of unbelievable power. You know, I mean, how many people will read the Kitabi Akdas in their lives? Probably a fairly small number. But the hidden words are read probably by every Baha'i and by many who aren't Baha'is. And they're so powerful in their influence on the way we think and we feel. And who knows if they would have even been revealed if he had been a manifestation immediately. A manifestation has to be in charge. He's got a job to do. He's got to run the show, right? No, it gave him that opportunity to reveal things and to reveal the 7 valleys and the 4 valleys and a number of other tablets were revealed during that period, and poetry, glorious poetry. And we have all of those writings. And those writings are incredibly powerful because they're coming from a manifestation, but it's a manifestation who's not yet declared, right? And there's tremendous wisdom in that interval. Honestly, the way I would look at it is that if the Bab had not given an interval of 9 or 19 years, and by the way, even leaving it ambiguous like that is brilliant because, you know, when people see that something is not absolutely clear, then that gives them an opening. They're going to, oh yeah, we're going to get in there. He can't make up his mind, so we'll show him. We know what he really meant. And so they gave all kinds of, you know, what they did is they seized upon this particular verse in the Persian Bayan that talks about the Mustaghath, which is quoted in one of these tablets that we looked at this week. And the way they interpreted the Mustaghath is to interpret it in its numerological meaning, which means 2001. They said, oh, well, there's not going to be a manifestation of God for 2001 years. And what does that mean for Mirza Yahya? It means I'm in charge. You know, I'm going to run the show because he's not coming for 2,000 years. So we're going to do whatever we want. And in case it may not have been noticed by many Baha'is, is the record of completely immoral behavior on the part of this half-brother of Baha'u'llah is so egregious, it's so shocking, even for 21st century people, that we don't even want to read about it now. To give you one example, which is talked about by The Guardian, it's talked about by Baha'u'llah, in the Bab had a second wife when he went to Isfahan. And he insisted that no one was to marry his second wife. And why? Because you don't marry the wife of the manifestation, period. Nobody married any of the wives of Muhammad, for example. Nobody would dare to marry, you know, the wife of Moses after he died. No, that is just not done. You don't have that kind of a relationship with the consort, with the partner of a manifestation. You went way beyond the line. Well, not only did Mirza Yahya marry this second wife of the Bab, but he didn't like her. So he gave her away to his chief follower to be his wife. Now, we all come from pretty liberal backgrounds, and we're used to all kinds of disgusting behavior. But if you think about it really in the terms of the holiness that surrounds the person of the Bab, and that he would have that wish that nobody violate the chastity of his wife, and that Mirza Yahya did it and then got his lieutenant, his chief ally, to do it. It's for the Persians, this was the worst. This was the worst that he could have done, because all of his other actions, which involved murder, which involved conspiracy to murder, which involved poisoning, which involved telling all kinds of lies to the heads of the Ottoman government and to the Persian government to try to get the Baha'is in trouble. All of these things pale in comparison with this, because this is violating the dignity of the manifestation. And yet, not only did he do it, but he had followers. And his followers were very instrumental in the Persian revolution. They had a constitutional revolution where they tried to establish a representative government. And it failed. But it was many of the primary participants in that, leaders, were Babis. They were followers of Mirza Yahya. But it was absolutely doomed to failure, because look at the character of these people. These people knew no God. They didn't believe in God. They didn't believe in manifestation. They just believed in power. They believed, I can do whatever I want. So I think we have to look at those references to time periods and see what happened around them to really understand what they meant at the time and what they warn us about in our own time. Is, we have to always keep in mind that the divine principles don't go away, and they aren't held in abeyance for any reason. They're always there, and we either measure up to them or we fail. And the only way back to adherence to those principles is to realize that we've made a mistake, and to literally return.
So we have one more question, and then we need to close out for the night. And that is, last week you mentioned that understanding is dependent on purity of the heart, chastity of the soul, and freedom of the spirit. Could you tell us your understanding of freedom of spirit?
Well, first of all, those are kind of synonyms of each other. Purity of the heart, chastity of the soul. It's not like something else. The heart here he's talking about is qalb in Arabic. And the soul is nafs. And they're equivalent. He's really using different language to talk about the same thing. He's talking about your spiritual reality. But the words he uses are really important. Purity, chastity, and freedom. What freedom is he talking about? He's talking about the freedom that Baha'u'llah discusses in the Kitab Aqdas, when he says true liberty is found only in submission to the law of God. Boom. And you thought true liberty was, I got to do whatever I want, whenever I want. No, it's the exact opposite. He said that is the sign of the animal. That kind of freedom, that's the animal. And the animal's it's fine for the animal to have that kind of freedom, but not for human beings. Human beings need to follow a shepherd. We're like sheep that need to follow a shepherd. That's exactly the example he uses. So I'm sorry, I got excited, and so I went off topic, I think. I'm trying to remember, what were you actually asking?
Well, the question was answered in that, at least personally, from my standpoint of that question. It was a question
so
asked
purity.
by D. If D has any more thoughts, they're free to, of course.
So basically, I think one of the things we have to remember is we see this lofty language and we say, well, I'm not like that. I'm not pure. I'm not chaste. I don't have this kind of spiritual freedom. Yes, you do. Of course you do. You're here. We're studying this word of God together. I mean, you could have been doing a whole lot of other things. Okay. You know, there are millions of us out there who are doing other things that are not reading the Word of God, are not trying to improve their spiritual lives, and we encounter them in large numbers every day. Okay, and so don't like beat up on yourself. We have this capacity because the purity of heart and the chastity of soul and the liberty, the freedom, the true freedom is not found in some impossible to achieve state that's only for like Catholic saints or something like that, you know? No, it's for people who are willing to let go of attachments to the things that are blocking them from listening to God. It's that simple. It really is that simple. And 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 it's the reason why it's such a consistent theme for all the manifestations and in Baha'u'llah's writings is because we're awful. We're awful at it. We don't believe that we have this capacity, and we get all hung up in attachments to material things, even though we know that someday we're going to die. And we don't know when that's going to happen. None of us have a clue. You know, we just heard today that this wonderful guy, I mean, a great guy, okay? A great guy was shot down in cold blood. You know, I mean, what was he, like 40 years old or something? He was, we would have thought that he was going to live a long life. But no, we have no control over when we're going to go. None. And we just need to be ready when the time comes. Because Baha'u'llah says at the moment of death, how many people who've lived a whole life dedicated to God will turn away from him? And at that very same moment, how many who have turned away from him will turn to him? We can't guarantee that you, just because you lived a good life, you're going to go to the next world and be happy. No, because every moment counts. Every moment, and the dedication, deep down dedication that this requires of us. And that, so yes, in a sense, it's attainable to all of us, and it's also work for all of us. And the reason why I say it's attainable to all of us is because look at the context of that statement when you look at the Kitab Yagan. Kitab Yagan, right before that, says that when you say that the word of God is not accessible to the common man and that you have to go to a priest to understand it, then how can the common man be held accountable for his actions? How is it fair that God says you have to understand the scripture and follow it when he can't understand the scripture? So he says, of course, you can understand it, and all you need to understand it is to have a pure heart and to have a chaste soul and to have a freedom of spirit. And those are qualities that are attainable by every human being. We all have that capacity. And we should spend our whole lives acquiring it and helping other people to acquire it.
Thank you, Peter. I would like to say a prayer for the departed, and then we will close out.
Thank you.
O my God, verily thy servant, humble before the majesty of thy divine supremacy, lowly at the door of thy oneness, hath believed in thee and in thy verses, hath testified to thy word, hath been enkindled with the fire of thy love, hath been immersed in the depths of the ocean of thy knowledge, hath been attracted by thy breezes, hath relied upon thee, hath turned his face to thee, hath offered his supplications to thee, and hath been assured of thy pardon and forgiveness, He hath abandoned this mortal life, and hath flown to the kingdom of immortality, yearning for the favor of meeting thee. O Lord, glorify his station, shelter him under the pavilion of thy supreme mercy, cause him to enter thy glorious paradise, and perpetuate his existence in thine exalted rose garden, that he may plunge into the sea of light in the world of mysteries. Verily, thou art the generous, the powerful, the forgiver, and the bestower. Thank you all. Have a good night.